The sun was shining over New York City, casting a golden light over the skyline. Inside the Grand Victoria Hotel, a black limousine pulled up to the main entrance. The doorman rushed to open the car door. Out stepped Jonathan Creed, a millionaire known for making his fortune in tech. He wore dark sunglasses, a designer coat, and a silver watch that sparkled in the morning light. People knew Jonathan. He was in magazines, on TV interviews, and always surrounded by flash. But he also had a reputation. He was cold, proud, and often unkind to those he thought were below him. As Jonathan walked through the lobby, people moved aside. He didn't smile or say hello. He didn't need to. He believed money was enough to open doors and shut people up. A hotel manager greeted him quickly and led him to the private elevator. "Your penthouse is ready, Mr. Creed," the manager said with a polite bow. Jonathan nodded without a word, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even look up when the elevator opened on the top floor. His suite was massive, with tall windows, a grand piano, and a view of the Empire State Building. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. An elderly maid stood inside, fluffing the pillows and straightening a vase. She was small, with silver hair tied back in a neat bun. Her uniform was crisp, and her movements were slow but careful. She turned and smiled warmly. "Good morning, sir. Just finishing up in here," she said kindly. Jonathan stared at her, confused. Then his lip curled slightly. "Seriously, they still hire people your age," he said with a laugh. "Don't you get dizzy walking around with those old bones?" The room went quiet. The maid, whose name was Miss Eloise, didn't flinch. She had heard worse in her life. She simply smiled again, even softer this time. "I've been walking these halls since before you were born, sir," she said gently. "I'll be done in just a moment." Jonathan snorted. "Take your time, Grandma. Just try not to drop anything." With that, he tossed his designer bag onto the bed and walked into the bathroom, leaving the door halfway open. Miss Eloise finished her task quietly. She straightened the towels he had thrown, placed a fresh chocolate on the pillow, and made sure everything looked perfect. She spotted something small on the nightstand, a faded photograph. It showed a woman holding a baby, smiling in front of a small house. Carefully, Miss Eloise picked it up and studied it for a moment. Something about the woman's eyes felt familiar. She placed it back without a word, just as Jonathan came out of the bathroom. "You still here?" he asked, drying his hands. "All done, sir," she said with a nod. Then she turned and walked slowly out of the room. As the door clicked shut behind her, Jonathan rolled his eyes and fell back onto the bed. He didn't notice the photo was now tucked gently under the lamp. He didn't notice the fresh scent in the air. He didn't think twice about the woman he had just insulted. But others did. In the hallway, two younger maids looked at each other and shook their heads. One whispered, "He'll learn." People like that always do. And somewhere near the lobby, Miss Eloise moved on to her next room, humming a soft song to herself. The Grand Victoria Hotel had thick walls, but words still found their way through them. By the end of the day, nearly everyone on the 12th floor had heard what Jonathan Creed said to Miss Eloise. In the staff break room, a young bellhop named Marco poured himself a cup of coffee. He shook his head as he spoke to Clara, a soft-spoken room service worker. "Did you hear what he said to Miss Eloise?" Marco asked, clearly upset. Clara nodded slowly. "I did. She didn't say a word back, just kept smiling like always." Marco sat down at the small table. "I don't get it. She's worked here longer than most of us have been alive. She's like family." "He doesn't know that," Clara replied. "To him, she's just invisible." The conversation spread like ripples in a pond. In the laundry room, the head of housekeeping, Mrs. Lynn, told two interns about how Miss Eloise once stayed late to help after a flood in the basement. In the kitchen, the pastry chef said Miss Eloise helped him learn English when he first arrived in America. "She's more than a maid," he said. "She's the heart of this place." Upstairs, Miss Eloise kept working. She didn't ask for sympathy or complain. Her hands folded towels the same way they always had. Her steps were quiet and steady. But deep inside, something did hurt. Not because Jonathan mocked her. She had faced worse in her life, but because of how easy it was for him to look through her, as if she didn't matter. She passed by a mirror in the hallway and paused for a moment. She looked at herself, lines around her eyes, silver in her hair. She had grown older, yes, but with age came wisdom, strength, and stories no one could guess just by looking. Still, Jonathan's words echoed faintly in her ears. She straightened her back and kept walking. Meanwhile, Jonathan was in the penthouse suite, pacing the floor on his phone. "They sent me some old woman to clean my room," he laughed into the speaker. "Can you believe it? This is supposed to be a 5-star hotel." He didn't notice the small things that had been done with care. The fresh flowers, the polished silver, the perfectly folded napkin on his desk. Later that evening, he ordered room service. Clara was the one who brought up the tray. When she entered the suite, Jonathan barely looked at her. "Put it there," he said, pointing without turning. As she placed the tray down, Clara glanced around. She saw the photo under the lamp, slightly tilted. It caught her eye for a second before she turned back toward the door. Jonathan didn't thank her. As Clara stepped into the hallway, she let out a quiet sigh. Marco was waiting near the elevator. "How was it?" he asked. "The same," Clara replied. "He acts like the world is here to serve him." They both stepped into the elevator and rode down in silence. Somewhere below, Miss Eloise finished wiping down the last mirror of her shift. She picked up her cleaning cart and began heading to the storage room. As she passed by the service elevator, a soft tune escaped her lips, a song her mother used to sing. It filled the space with a strange kind of peace. She didn't know that tomorrow morning, a single knock on Jonathan's door would change everything. The next morning, Jonathan woke up late. The sun had already climbed high in the sky, and the city outside was buzzing with life. He stretched lazily, feeling the soft sheets of the penthouse suite under him. He was in no rush. He had everything he needed: money, fame, and a suite that most people could only dream of. But then, as he got up to get dressed, he noticed something strange. A small photograph was tucked under the lamp on the nightstand, slightly out of place. He furrowed his brows. He hadn't seen it there the night before. With a shrug, Jonathan picked it up. It was an old, faded picture. A woman, probably in her 30s, was holding a baby in her arms. Both of them were smiling, standing outside what looked like a small house. The picture seemed so simple, but something about it made Jonathan pause. Who were they? He wondered. Why was this picture here in his suite? He glanced over at the table, where the maid's cleaning cart had been left. He vaguely remembered the elderly woman, Miss Eloise. She must have left the photo behind by accident. He wasn't sure why, but something about the image tugged at his mind. He put the photo down on the table and forgot about it for a moment. He had business to do. As he stepped into the bathroom to get ready for the day, the picture sat quietly on the table, waiting. Meanwhile, Miss Eloise had already started her work for the day. She arrived early, as usual. The sun had barely risen when she stepped into the hotel, her soft shoes making almost no sound on the marble floors. She greeted the morning staff with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Eloise," one of the bellhops called as she passed by. "Good morning, Charlie," she replied, her voice gentle and steady. She didn't mind the early hours. She had worked like this for years. It wasn't just about cleaning rooms. It was about making people feel comfortable, at peace. It was about serving with dignity. She had seen so much in her life and knew that every person she helped, no matter how small the task, deserved respect. Today, Miss Eloise made her way to the penthouse suite again. As she walked down the hallway, she could hear the faint sound of Jonathan's voice, shouting at someone on the phone. She paused outside the door for a moment, wondering if she should knock or wait. Just as she was about to knock, The door swung open. Jonathan stepped out, looking annoyed, his phone pressed to his ear. He barely glanced at her. "Yeah, I'll get back to you later," he said into the phone, then hung up. "Good morning, sir," Miss Eloise said politely. "Oh, it's you," he muttered, clearly uninterested. "Just get it over with. I've got a meeting soon." Miss Eloise nodded, though her heart tightened just a little at his tone. She walked past him into the suite, starting her work. As she moved about the room, she glanced over at the nightstand, where the photograph had been the night before. It was now gone. She didn't ask any questions. Instead, she focused on what she did best, making the room fresh and comfortable for the next guest. But as she bent to fold the towels, something caught her eye. A small silver key on the floor under the desk. It looked out of place, like it had fallen from somewhere. She picked it up carefully, and her eyes softened. She recognized the engraving on the key. It was from a special locker, one that she knew well. A small piece of history, tucked away, waiting to be discovered. She felt a quiet sense of something important happening, something that would soon unfold in ways none of them expected. The morning was calm, and Jonathan Creed was not in the mood to deal with anything unexpected. He had stayed up late preparing for an important business meeting, so he was in no mood to entertain anything that wasn't part of his plan. But then, at exactly 8:17 a.m., there came a knock at his door. It wasn't the usual room service or a bellhop delivering something he had ordered. This was different. Jonathan raised an eyebrow and glanced at his watch. Who could it be at this hour? He thought, annoyed. He was expecting no visitors. He opened the door, still in his robe, half expecting it to be a staff member asking for something trivial. Instead, standing before him was a tall, sharply dressed man. The man's presence was imposing, and his expression was serious but calm. "Good morning, Mr. Creed," the man said in a deep, steady voice. "I am Marshall Dean, the owner of this hotel chain. May I come in?" Jonathan blinked, taken aback. Marshall Dean, the owner? What was he doing here? Sure," Jonathan said after a moment of surprise, stepping back to let the man in. He quickly brushed his hair, trying to look more put together. Marshall entered, followed by two other men, hotel executives who Jonathan didn't recognize. They weren't carrying bags or folders, but the way they stood suggested they were here on serious business. They didn't have the usual warmth of the hotel staff. "Please, have a seat," Jonathan said, gesturing to the lounge chairs. He tried to act casual, but his mind was racing. What was going on? Marshall Dean nodded and took a seat. His eyes locked on Jonathan, and for a moment there was silence. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the man to speak. "I'm here because of a situation that has come to my attention," Marshall began, his voice calm but firm. "Yesterday, one of your comments made to one of our staff members caused some concern. To be clear, I'm not here to fight, but it's important you understand something." Jonathan frowned, now even more confused. "What are you talking about?" Marshall leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "I'm talking about Miss Eloise, one of our longest-serving employees. A maid. She's been with us for many years, and she has a quiet, unshakable dignity. It seems you were disrespectful to her yesterday." Jonathan felt a jolt of discomfort. The memory of his words the day before flashed in his mind, and suddenly, he felt a small sense of shame creeping in. "Wait, I didn't mean anything by it," Jonathan stammered, suddenly feeling awkward. "I was just making a joke." Marshall didn't flinch. His tone remained steady. "It was not a joke to Miss Eloise. She's worked hard her entire life. She raised me when no one else would. Her strength and kindness have shaped this hotel in ways you wouldn't understand. She has been a quiet leader here. And yesterday, you disrespected her." Jonathan sat back, stunned. He had no idea who Miss Eloise really was. All he had seen was an old woman cleaning rooms. He hadn't stopped to think about her story, her life, or the many years she had worked here. Marshall continued, his voice softer now. but filled with emotion. "I'm here because I want you to understand something important. The people who work behind the scenes, who don't ask for credit or attention, they are the heart of what makes a place like this special." As Jonathan listened, something in him shifted. He had been so caught up in his own world of wealth and success, he had forgotten what really mattered. Miss Eloise wasn't just a maid. She was a person with a lifetime of experience, of wisdom, and of love. "So, what do you want me to do?" Jonathan finally asked, his voice small, a bit embarrassed. Marshall stood up, nodding. "I want you to reflect on your words, and I want you to apologize to Miss Eloise. Not just with words, but with understanding." The room was silent for a moment as Jonathan processed everything he had just heard. "I will," he said quietly, his tone more genuine than it had been in a long time. He stood up and shook Marshall's hand. "Thank you for letting me know. I didn't realize." Marshall smiled slightly. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." As Marshall and the hotel executives left the suite, Jonathan stood there, still thinking. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than frustration or arrogance. It was the beginning of something that would change the way he saw people. After Marshall Dean and his team left Jonathan's penthouse, the young millionaire felt a mix of confusion and shame. He wandered to the large windows, staring out at the city below. The skyline, which had always felt like a symbol of his success, now felt distant, almost cold. He couldn't shake the conversation he had just had. He had been rude, yes, but worse than that. He had been ignorant. Miss Eloise wasn't just another hotel employee. She was a part of something bigger, a piece of history that Jonathan had never thought to understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was soft, respectful, but Jonathan felt a sudden urge to answer it. When he opened the door, standing before him was Miss Eloise, her presence as calm as ever. She was carrying a small tray with a pot of coffee and 2 cups, the way she often did when serving guests who wanted a quiet morning. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly, her voice as gentle as it had been the day before. Jonathan froze for a moment. He had been expecting to apologize, but now that the moment was here, he felt awkward and unsure. "Good morning," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Miss Eloise smiled softly and placed the tray on the table by the window. She moved slowly, her movements graceful, as if she had nothing to prove. Jonathan stood silently for a moment, watching her. The words he had prepared suddenly seemed too small. Finally, he took a breath and spoke. "Miss Eloise, I owe you an apology," Jonathan said, his voice more sincere than he expected. "Yesterday I was rude. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but I did, and I want to say I'm sorry." Miss Eloise didn't respond right away. Instead, she picked up the coffee pot and poured them both a cup, her hand steady despite her age. Then she turned to face him. "I've worked in this hotel for many years, Mr. Creed," she said, her voice steady. "And I've seen many types of people. Some are kind, some are rude, but I've learned to let things go. People say things they don't always mean." Jonathan frowned. "But I did mean it, and I should have known better." Miss Eloise set the pot down, then sat across from him. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface. "You're not the first to make a mistake, and you won't be the last. But what matters now is what you do after. You have a choice to make, Mr. Creed. You can continue thinking the way you have, or you can choose to see people for who they really are." Jonathan took a sip of his coffee, feeling a little awkward but also oddly calm. He had never thought about life like this. He had spent so much time focused on power, money, and success that he had forgotten to see the people around him. People like Miss Eloise, who had lived through so much. "I didn't understand," Jonathan admitted, "but I want to. I want to see things differently." Miss Eloise nodded, her face softening. "That's all anyone can ask for." There was a long pause as the two of them sat quietly, sipping their coffee. For Jonathan, the silence felt more meaningful than anything he had said or done in a long time. It was as if, in that moment, he was starting to understand what true respect really meant. Finally, Jonathan stood up, his mind made up. "Thank you, Miss Eloise, for being patient with me. I'll do better." Miss Eloise smiled, her eyes warm. "I believe you will." As Jonathan watched her leave the room, he felt a strange sense of peace. The hotel felt different now, more alive with meaning. He knew he had a long way to go, but today, he had taken the first step toward becoming a better person. The days following Jonathan's conversation with Miss Eloise felt different. He was still the same man, successful, busy, and often lost in his own world, but something inside him had changed. It wasn't huge, but it was enough for him to notice. He found himself paying more attention to the people around him, especially those who had always been invisible to him. He started by making small efforts to be kinder to the hotel staff. He greeted the doorman with a smile as he left for a meeting, something he never did before. He noticed the bellhops carrying heavy bags and took a moment to thank them for their hard work. And one morning, when he passed by the hotel kitchen, he saw the pastry chef looking tired as he worked. Jonathan stopped, surprised by how much he had been missing. "You look like you've been up all night," Jonathan said, offering a small smile. The pastry chef looked up, blinking in surprise. "Oh well, we've got a big event coming up. Lots of orders." "Don't overwork yourself," Jonathan said, giving a small nod. "I appreciate the effort you put in." The pastry chef was so taken aback that he didn't know what to say. "Thank you, Mr. Creed. That means a lot." As Jonathan walked away, he couldn't help but feel good about what he had done. It was a small thing, but it made him realize just how much he had been missing. He had been so focused on himself that he had forgotten the value of simple kindness. Later that week, Jonathan was in the hotel lobby, waiting for a car to take him to another meeting. He glanced around and saw Miss Eloise again, moving quietly through the crowd, her cart full of cleaning supplies. She was pushing it slowly, with a peaceful look on her face, as if the chaos of the hotel didn't touch her at all. Jonathan watched her for a moment, then walked over to her. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, but it felt right. "Miss Eloise," he said, his voice gentle. She looked up in surprise but smiled warmly when she saw him. "Mr. Creed, good to see you. How's your day going?" Jonathan asked, surprised by how natural it felt to speak to her now. "Busy, as always," she replied with a chuckle. "But it's good work." "I wanted to apologize again," Jonathan said, his voice sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I want you to know that I see you now. I see the work you do. I see you." Miss Eloise's smile softened. "Thank you, Mr. Creed. But you don't need to keep apologizing. People learn in their own time. What matters is you're seeing the world a little differently now." Jonathan nodded, feeling a quiet pride inside him. "I think I'm starting to understand more than I ever have." Before Miss Eloise could respond, a young man walked up to her, carrying a stack of towels. He looked at Jonathan nervously before turning his attention back to her. "Miss Eloise, could you help me with this?" the young man asked, his voice polite but unsure. "Of course, dear," she said, smiling at him. She turned to Jonathan. "You see, Mr. Creed, everyone here is just doing their part. We all have something to contribute, no matter how small it seems." Jonathan watched her as she walked off with the young man, her presence as steady and kind as always. He felt something in his chest, a quiet sense of gratitude. Miss Eloise had taught him something important. She had shown him that kindness didn't come with a price tag, and that everyone had a story worth hearing. As Jonathan sat in the lobby, waiting for his car, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. The world was bigger than he had realized. There was more to life than just making money and climbing higher. He had learned that true success wasn't about how much you had. It was about how you treated others along the way. Weeks passed, and Jonathan's life continued to move forward. He was busy with meetings, events, and business deals, but something had shifted in him, something he couldn't quite explain. He had started to feel less alone, less driven by the need to prove himself to the world. There was a new calmness in him, a quiet understanding of what really mattered. One afternoon, Jonathan received a phone call in his office. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet unexpected. "Mr. Creed," the voice asked. "This is Marshall Dean. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Jonathan paused for a moment, surprised. He hadn't heard from Marshall since their conversation a few weeks ago. He had been meaning to reach out, but with everything going on, he hadn't found the right time. "No, not at all, Mr. Dean," Jonathan replied, his voice warm but cautious. "What's on your mind?" "I wanted to invite you to something," Marshall said. "A small gathering. It's for people who have been important to the hotel. You, of course, are one of them. It's tomorrow evening." "I would be honored," Jonathan said without hesitation. He had learned the importance of these kinds of connections, of showing up for the people who mattered. He had always been too focused on his own world, but now he understood the value of relationships. "Great," Marshall said. "I'll send you the details. I look forward to seeing you there." The next evening, Jonathan arrived at the venue, a cozy, dimly lit hall near the hotel. It was smaller than he had expected, but it felt warm and inviting. He could hear soft music playing in the background as people mingled, chatting over drinks. Jonathan noticed a few familiar faces from the hotel staff, including the manager and a few of the chefs. But his eyes immediately sought out Miss Eloise. She was standing by the window, talking to a few other staff members. As soon as she saw him, she smiled and waved, her face lighting up. "Mr. Creed, I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice as calm and steady as ever. "Thank you for inviting me," Jonathan replied, feeling a little out of place, but eager to connect with the people who had made a difference in his life. They talked for a while, and Jonathan noticed how natural the conversation felt. He had been so used to talking business, to talking about things that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of life. But now, with Miss Eloise and the others, the conversation was about real things, about family, about life, about the hard work that went into building something meaningful. As the night went on, Jonathan found himself deep in conversation with Marshall. They spoke about the hotel, about the changes that had been made over the years, and about how the future looked for the business. But then Marshall said something that caught Jonathan off guard. "You know," Marshall said with a thoughtful look, "this hotel is more than just a place to stay. It's a community, and the people who work here are the heart of it. You've made a real difference by taking the time to understand that. I can see it in the way you're connecting with everyone here tonight." Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged the change in him, but Marshall's words hit him deeply. He wasn't the same man who had arrived at the hotel weeks ago. He had learned to appreciate the quiet dignity in others. He had learned that true success wasn't about how much money you had, but about how you treated the people around you. The night ended with a feeling of warmth, of connection. Jonathan left the event with a heart full of gratitude, grateful for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself. He had discovered that the real treasures in life were the people you met along the way, the bonds you built, and the love you gave without expecting anything in return. As he stepped into the car that would take him back to his suite, Jonathan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. For the first time in a long while, he was truly content. Weeks turned into months, and Jonathan found himself settling into a new rhythm. Life wasn't about the same rush anymore. The constant chase for more success, more recognition, more wealth. He had discovered something far more valuable: the power of kindness, understanding, and connection. He had become a regular visitor at the hotel, not for business, but to spend time with the people who had changed his view of the world. He had learned from Miss Eloise, from Marshall, from the staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He had learned that every person had a story, a history, and a role in making the world a little better. One afternoon, Jonathan sat down in a quiet corner of the hotel's lobby, sipping his coffee and thinking about the changes in his life. He was no longer the impatient, arrogant businessman he had been. He was still successful, but success had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about the relationships he had built, the respect he had earned, and the lives he had touched. As he sat there, he spotted Miss Alois coming down the hallway, her cart full of cleaning supplies. She moved slowly, as always, with a calm grace that seemed to slow time itself. Jonathan stood up and walked over to her, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. "Miss Alois," he said, his voice filled with warmth. She looked up, smiling as she always did. "Mr. Creed, it's good to see you. How are you today?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Oh, just fine," she replied with a twinkle in her eye. "Busy, but fine. It's always good to stay busy." "I was thinking," Jonathan began, feeling the sudden surge of inspiration, "that we should do something together. Something to give back. Something that will make a difference for the people who have always been in the background." Miss Alois raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "What do you have in mind?" "Well," Jonathan said, taking a deep breath, "I want to start a program for young people, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, who want to learn the value of hard work, kindness, and community. I want to give them the chance to see that success isn't just about money, but about the impact you make in other people's lives." Miss Alois's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mr. Creed. But I must ask, what made you think of this?" Jonathan smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "It's because of you, Miss Alois. Because of everything you've taught me. You've shown me the importance of giving back, of helping others. I want to help others the way you've helped me." She looked at him for a long moment, then placed a hand gently on his arm. "You've learned something important, Jonathan. Now, it's time to share that with others. I believe you'll make a difference." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling between them. Jonathan knew that this was just the beginning of something bigger. The idea of a program to help young people was only the first step, but it was a step in the right direction. As Jonathan walked away from Miss Alois, he felt a sense of purpose growing inside him. He was no longer just a businessman. He was someone who wanted to leave a lasting legacy, not of wealth, but of kindness and compassion. He began to put his plan into action, speaking with Marshall, other community leaders, and local schools. Together, they built a program that would help young people gain the skills and values they needed to succeed, not just in business, but in life. Over time, the program grew, and Jonathan saw the impact it had on the lives of so many young people. They learned the importance of empathy, respect, and working hard for something greater than themselves. And as Jonathan watched the program flourish, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the lesson that Miss Alois had taught him. That true success is not measured by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you do for others.